I think it's important for people to know that no one is going to do something for you. Like, as important as it is to identify these moments where a door could open, you still have to open that door, and you still have to deliver, and you still have to make it happen. And, sure, sometimes there are certain connections that help catalyze something. It kind of bums me out when I see people get caught up in the mentality of like, just, someone else could really change everything for me. That no one else will do something for you. You got to do it yourself.
Hey, what's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to Tweak Music Tips Live Tuesday. Today we have the honor of having A-Trak in the building. He's a DJ, remixer, producer. He's been in the business a long, long time. Veteran in the game. He's one of the youngest people to win the DJ competition, DMC World Championship. He was 15, and he was the first Canadian, which is awesome. He owns Fool's Gold. He's one half of Duck Sauce. I mean, what else can we say about him? There's so many accolades and things I could go through. It'd probably take me a little docu-series for me to give him his intro. But the one and only DJ A-Trak. What's up, brother?
What up?
How you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I know we've been talking about doing this for a while, so I appreciate the patience. I'm glad we got it done.
Of course, of course. So let's go into some of the things that are happening now. I know that obviously a lot of people are on lockdown. Things are kind of closed depending on your region. Where were you and what happened when things started to shut down?
I was in New York. I split my time generally between New York and LA.
Okay.
So I was in New York, and early March is like really normally such like a planning time of the year. It's like that. I remember it was, shortly before South by Southwest and Miami Music Week, and I had some plans for not only the months that followed, but already like some festival bookings for the summer, and like starting to see the year shape up in a sense. And then I really remember when, Ultra got canceled, and then people were saying like, yeah, Ultra's canceled, but that's because there's this one city councilman in Miami who hates Ultra. So that's not, let's not worry too much. Yeah. And then South by Southwest got canceled, and everyone was like, yeah, but South by is really corporate. There's people from all these multinational companies. They can't be traveling that much. And then it was really like, they're not going to cancel Coachella though, because that was like over a month away, and but yeah, then, as far as COVID itself, things got really serious really fast, and I decided to come out to my house in LA, where I just kind of have more space. And I've been at the house here in LA for over a year, because it went from like, oh yeah, we're just gonna need to camp out for like 4 to 6 weeks, to like, I guess it'll be a few months, to like, oh shit, this summer, and then a year.
That's crazy. So that's got to be new, right? To having to sit for a whole year, like, especially with your traveling schedule, it's got to be nuts.
Never been in one place this long my whole adult life.
Shout out to Nick Spinelli. Thank you so much, bro. Thank you for the raid. We appreciate you guys. Welcome, Raiders. Welcome, Raiders.
Welcome.
We have A-Trak in the building, if you guys just tuned in. So let's talk about that. Was it hard in the beginning? Like, I mean, to wrap your head around? So now it's like, remember, we were all talking about 2 weeks, then 2 months.
Yeah.
Now comes this, well, obviously it's a year in.
Yeah.
How did you adjust? Like, what did you start doing?
I mean, I feel like when I think back at those first couple months of lockdown, it was a real mix of like, on one hand, kind of frantically trying to figure out, even just on a sort of safety and medical level, like what to do. Like, it's crazy thinking back at just like the toilet paper panic and things like that, and like, oh shit, we need more Clorox wipes, and who's got hand sanitizer, and masks and all this kind of stuff. So on one hand, like scrambling to find stuff and even understand the protocol and what to do, and on the other hand, total uncertainty of like, how long is this going to be for? How long are we canceling gigs for? And what's that going to mean financially? But I also remember, once I sort of, in those first few weeks of coming out to the LA house and just thinking like, okay, I don't even know how long I'm going to be for, but I just know that I'm not traveling for a while. I also remember there was something that I kind of that was a positive for me, which was, oh, I can spend a bunch of hours a day just messing around on my turntables and trying out new ideas and filming, filming my practice sessions and experimenting in a way that I hadn't had the freedom to do in a really long time. So like pretty fast, I just jumped into that. I just thought like, oh, I don't have to jump on a plane in 2 days. Well, I have like literally years of like ideas stored in the back of my head of like just little turntablist tricks or new pieces of equipment that were just like, on a shelf that I hadn't even plugged in, where I was like, cool, let's try shit. Like, let me just see what I can come up with. Because normally I hadn't really had time to just practice on an experimentation kind of level with my decks in a really long time. I would just be like working on tracks and chasing deadlines and taking care of the label and going from one show to the next. So that type of like, let me just try stuff out with no specific agenda in sight and no deadline right away. That kind of freedom was something I really welcomed. But then there was just this sort of like constant adjustment of like, you know, you try on one hand, I would try to just stay in that place of that sort of artistic freedom of like I could do whatever I want musically. I don't have to jump on a plane. Try to stay in that openness. But then in the back of the head, it's like, okay, but what's this gonna mean? How many months do I have to live off my savings for? Or like, what are we not doing Fool's Gold Day Off this year? Are we not doing Goldie Awards this year? Am I canceling this? Am I canceling that? Like those open questions in the back of the head, they would sort of creep up for a while. And I feel like a lot of last year was just that, of just short-term thinking of like, I'm gonna work on this week, but in the back of the head, like, what's really gonna happen?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting too, and it's funny because you all say the same, right? We're just talking to Jazzy Jeff. He's like 170. You guys all travel a lot, so he was like
Yeah,
70, 180 gigs a month, or excuse me, a year.
a year, yeah.
All of a sudden, having to acclimate to like, oh wow, he was saying this is the first time he slept in his bed for 3 months.
Oh,
So,
for sure, me too.
and you were just saying that now, right? Like having to
Yeah,
be in Cali all this time. So
yeah,
it's got to be an interesting thing. What's cool though is I feel like you really pivoted well, and then it started to embrace some of the streaming aspect of it,
yeah.
communicating.
Yeah, thanks. Well, but even with that, it was interesting because I think there was a lot of sort of stop and go with the conversations about streaming. Like the first 2 months or so of lockdown, I feel like every other day someone would hit me and be like, "Yo, fam, let's do a call. I got a new streaming platform. You got to try this out." Da, da, da. Everybody had a new website, a new platform, a new technology. And meanwhile, I was like just trying to order video converter cards and shit, like just trying to get my setup to even work and learning OBS and all that kind of stuff. And I think in the beginning, there was this sort of dream for a lot of DJs of like, oh, we can make money just streaming at home. Okay, this will be interesting. And the first few weeks of lockdown, I played some virtual festivals. Beatport did a fundraiser festival, and I remember the first Digital Mirage raised a lot of money for charity. So then a lot of there's a lot of conversations of like, oh well, we're raising money for charity, but after a while we can start doing a thing where we give part of it to charity, but part of it will be like our fees. And then uh and I think there was this sort of sobering moment after a little while where people realized like, oh yeah, there's not an infinite amount of donations going around, and like, just this sort of like idea that streaming was going to replace the touring business in terms of the income of a lot of DJs. That ended up not really being the case either. And there was even this sort of confusion of like, should we stream every week or multiple times a week, or do we keep it sort of an event each time? I don't think there's any like right or wrong answers for any of that. It really depends on what works for each DJ. I embraced streaming for sure, but I definitely didn't go super heavy on it. I don't stream every week at all. I'll do like maybe 2 things a month, if that. In part because of just how I manage my time, and like I ended up working on a lot of music and releasing tracks during lockdown, and also coming up with different types of routines and performances, and like, you know implementing different drum machines and just like messing around with new equipment ideas, which requires practice time and that sort of thing too. So, and I just didn't want to be on Twitch or IG Live, you know, so often that it wouldn't really be special anymore. I
Mm.
think for certain DJs, it works great though. It really just depends. I think, if anything, I get the sense that, you know, since lockdown started, there's been even more, like, there's always been many categories and many sort of verticals or many like silos for DJs to operate. You know, there's always been mixtape DJs, radio DJs,
Yeah.
club resident DJs, festival DJs, touring DJs, da da da, producers who have hits and then they get booked to play their hits with their sets. Like, that's always existed. Now there's also streaming, and even within streaming, there's a couple different styles. So I think it's just sort of expanded the possibilities, and it's up to each DJ to decide where they want to devote their energy and just kind of what works for them. For me, because the stuff I do is very performance based, and because, like I mentioned, I also want to keep a good amount of time to take care of my label and plan projects that come out months later and work on remixes and music. um, I ended up not fully diving into streaming all the time, and I try to make it so that anytime I do a stream, it's a different set from other times. And I was doing a lot of themed sets for the first couple of months too. I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna do a French touch set, and then and maybe I hadn't streamed in like 2-3 weeks, make a flyer for it, announce it, and then save it, put that on Mixcloud, put that on SoundCloud, put it on YouTube. And then a few weeks later, it'd be like, okay, cool, I'm gonna do like a backpack underground 90s rap set. Plan that, do that, and try to make each one of them an event. So that's how I approached it. Other DJs are streaming multiple times a week and making good money with that, and that's great. So it's just, we all kind of have to find, what works for our styles.
That's cool. Shout out to all the guys that came out for A-Trak, like Shortcuts in here. Shout out to
Oh, what up, Short?
Shout out to Chubby Chub. Shout out to Dave All Day. There's a lot of
Oh,
big wigs in here. Big shout out to you guys. I appreciate you guys. Real DJ Yoshi. Let's go. Who's on here?
I saw Cyber Kid up there earlier too.
Cyber Kid Official. Shout out to him. Yeah. Aiden Scott. Yeah. A-Trak, hands down, one of my favorite DJ. Big up.
Appreciate that.
Shout out to him. Who else we got in here? Yeah, Cyber Kid Official. What's up, fam? How you doing today? All you guys are in there. Forgard from Sweden. Shout out to you guys. So cool. Let's go a little bit into the beginning, because I feel like that has a lot to do with, because for the people that don't know things about you, there's so many things you've done. So I want to kind of go into the early years. And I know you sure. asked this, but from 13 to 15, 13, you picked up the, you grew up in Montreal, right?
Grew up in Montreal, yeah.
Your parents kind of pushed you and your brother to get into the arts, right? Like,
yeah, or at least, I mean, my brother and I both just got into music, and I'd say like our parents allowed it. Like, they kind of let us do what we wanted with that stuff.
Yeah. So when you guys, so Dave started in a band, right? Your brother's one half of Chromeo, right? The lead singer.
That's right.
Yeah.
But back then, when we were teenagers, he was just in a band with his friends from high school or whatever. Yeah. So my brother picked up the guitar when he was 9. He's older than me. So he's played music for as long as I can remember. And then I like tinkered around with the piano for a little bit, but I wasn't very good. And I was kind of like looking for my thing, because as the younger brother, I just also wanted to play an instrument. Yeah. And then it just turns out that a few years later, when I tried scratching the way that I think most hip hop fans will try scratching at one point on their dad's record player or whatever, I just happened to have some sort of knack for it. And then that became my instrument.
That's really cool. Now, you started, obviously, like everyone does, right? On their parents' turntable.
Yep.
Around a little
breaking needles.
And how did you finally get your own decks, and what did that look like?
So I started scratching at 13. I had a bar mitzvah, which was I have to say, like, I feel like people hear about these extravagant bar mitzvahs, but I had a pretty modest bar mitzvah. But, the family gives you like a little bit of money. So when I wanted to buy a proper turntable to scratch, the record shop that I used to go shop at in Montreal, someone was selling a secondhand turntable. I remember it was $400. So I had a little bit of money in the bank because of my bar mitzvah. That's where the $400 came from. I still had to have permission from my parents, and that was a whole conversation, because it was like, Dad, I want to buy a turntable. And, we have a turntable. Yeah, but this one's for scratching. What? My parents were just like, "Do they still make vinyl? Like, what? Why do you want to buy a turntable?" But eventually convinced them. So for a while, I had one Technics 1200,
Yeah.
had a Gemini Scratchmaster mixer, and then I had my father's cheap belt drive turntable. So for a while, I would like just play instrumentals on the belt drive joint and learn how to scratch on the 1200. And then maybe like 6 months later, um, I found another friend of a friend was selling a secondhand 1200. So then I had two, and then it was on. Then I was ready. And by then I discovered the VHS tapes of DMC battles. So I was watching Hubert and Rock Raider, Mixmaster Mike, Babu, Melody, all these guys. So once I had my second deck, then I was able to start learning how to beat juggle. And the first couple of years of my foray into DJing was not even really DJing. It was turntablism. Like I didn't know how to play a set. I
At
was
all.
like, but even when I was world champion, I don't think I knew how to like rock a party set yet. All I knew was how to do the most technical stuff.
That's interesting. Shout out to George May. Thank you so much for the raid. We appreciate your family. Thank you. These guys are
Hmm.
just so you know. I don't know if you see this chat, but they're going. They're absolutely going nuts. Shout out to
That's
everybody.
cool.
Hype train too, you guys. Thank you. Level 3, 60%. You got 2 minutes left. I appreciate you guys. We'll go back to that in a second. So
Cool.
one of the cool stories you have is so your brother was in a band. You ended up picking your instrument was the turntable, right? That's what you ended up picking.
Yeah.
And how your
Yep.
brother would challenge you. I love this story where
Oh yeah.
you're doing the set, right? And he's saying, well, what if the needle skips?
Yep. That's true. So I started scratching at 13. So obviously I couldn't get into clubs. So I was trying to do a thing that I couldn't even see firsthand.
Yeah.
And back then there wasn't any tutorials. There wasn't, the internet was slow as hell. There wasn't a YouTube to go and search, scratching lessons. So all I knew was what I heard on records, what I saw in a couple of VHS tapes that I could track down in Canada, and just secondhand information. But in Montreal, you can go to clubs when you're 18.
Oh,
When I was 13, my brother was 17, but he always looked older than he was, so he could pass for 18. So he was going to clubs. So he would go to clubs, hip hop clubs, and then the next morning he would tell me kind of like what he saw the DJ do. So he'd be like, yeah, then DJ was doing a thing that kind of looked like this or kind of sounded like this. And then I had secondhand information and I would go to my decks and just try to figure it out. A lot of times I would come up with something entirely different because I wasn't even there to see it. So I would come up with something and then later on I'd be like, oh wait, that's what Dave was talking about from that one time. But then I would end up with like more tricks because in the meantime I came up with my own stuff. Um, and then yeah, once I started really getting into more intricate routines and planning for battles, um, he was kind of my eyes and ears for a lot of stuff too. And even though he wasn't a DJ, he was a guitar player. He just had a good ear for music, so he knew kind of what sounded right. So I'd come home from school, practice for a couple hours, then he'd come home and be like, what you've been working on, and I would do something, and he'd be like, that part sounds really cool. That part sounds a little sloppy or weird. Like try to clean that up. So then I would work a little more. And yeah, once I started really training for battles in particular, there was one time I always tell this story that he it was on some Karate Kid shit. He was like, what if the needle skips? And I was like, well, I should be able to recover and find the spot in my beat juggle that I was using. And then he was like, no, this is what we're going to do. Do the routine. And I would start doing my routine. And at one point he would bang on the table, make the needle skip, and I would have to recover. So I really, really, I practiced very diligently for my battles. For someone who couldn't even get to clubs and had barely performed out at events by the time I entered my first battles, I was just trying to like cover my bases as much as possible and think about anything that could go wrong.
now what's insane to me is you get to so you're 15. You get to
Yep.
the world championship, right? You go with
Yeah, it's my first battle.
your first battle. You go
Yeah.
with your mom. Like your mom, she takes you to Italy, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I'm thinking of the older kids, how intimidating they could be, and just the whole thing. And you were talking about how excited you were just to scratch. So why don't you kind
Yeah.
of take us through that journey? You get to Italy and what that looks like.
Yeah. So basically that's where the DMC World Championships were. So I won the Montreal regionals for DMC.
Mm.
That took me to the Canadian finals. I won that, and that one Qbert was a guest judge, and Qbert was like the scratch god. So he kind of gave me a cosign when I won the Canadian finals too. So then I was like, oh shit, this is kind of serious. But I was also, also just thinking like, I wonder if my school will let me go, if my school will let me miss a couple days to go to Italy. I go to Italy for the World Finals, and yeah, like you mentioned, my mom came with me, and there was no one as young as me in those battles. I'm still not sure how I thought that it was even okay for me to give that stuff a shot. Like, why did I try entering battles when there was no one even under 20, I think, in any of those battles? For some reason, I was just like, I can do this. And I was just happy to be there. Like, I love to scratch, and I practiced very hard, and I was just kind of on some like, I'm gonna do my best and hopefully it works out. And when I won that battle, the DMC World Championships, I think like the guy who was second place was like 30 years old, like literally double my age, and he had like a couple kids, and whoever was third place was practically that age too. I wasn't intimidated by them. I think some of them were kind of pissed at me. I think a lot of those DJs had been entering battles for many, many years and trying to finally win, their title. And then I just came out of nowhere. There's never been a Canadian DJ that even got to the World Finals. Because at the World Finals, at the DMC battles, they send DJs from a bunch of countries, and then there's like in the afternoon, there's kind of an elimination where they narrow down to maybe a dozen or so. So the Canadians never used to make it past that part and never really made it to the real battle. So yeah, I make it to the proper final battle and win the whole thing. And I think all those other DJs that had been working for years and years were just sort of like, who's this kid who just came and like swept the rug from under our feet? But that was a good lesson too, because at the same time, I met a lot of my heroes. Some of the judges were Rock Raider, Qbert, DJ Noise, all these other world champions, Cutmaster Swift from the UK. They were all really cool with me, super supportive. Qbert ended up even inviting me to be an honorary member of the Invisible Scratch Pickles. Rock Raider was like a mentor for years after that for me. So the ones that I really looked up to were really encouraging and supportive. And the DJs who sort of hated on me at that age and who were sort of like, it's just a gimmick, he's just winning because he's young, they were also ones that kind of had a chip on their shoulder, who hadn't quite reached the achievements that they probably wanted to have. And that was a big life lesson to me, to observe that and be like, oh, the people that I want to be like, they're gracious, they're cool, they don't feel threatened by anyone, they welcome someone in like myself. And the ones that have some sort of frustration, they're bitter. I don't want to be bitter. I want to be, like the ones that took me in. And it was cool for me to have that sort of role model, to just be like, I want to be like that person who not only I idolize, but who I think is just a, cool, generous person. If Short is still in the chat, Shortcut and the Scratch Pickles, they all really welcomed me in. And really, like, Qbert decided to bring me into the Scratch Pickles. I hadn't even met the rest of the crew. So I remember feeling real gratitude for Mixmaster Mike, D-Styles, Shortcut, all of them, because I feel like they weren't even, they were just sort of like, oh, this kid is down with us? Okay. But they could have kept a guard up with me, but they didn't. They were so cool to me.
It's so funny. Shortcut says the same thing about how Qbert treated him and how they would, scratch in the garage and stuff. So it seems to be a moving theme. Now, what I want to get on it, though, is being that young, it could have been, you could have easily been discouraged. But what you explain is that your friends would call you the monk, right? Because you would just diligently be in, in your own zone, practicing, and you kept saying, if I keep winning, they can't say the things they're saying. So how did that play into it?
Yeah, I mean, so as amazing as it was to win a world championship at 15, there was some people who doubted, who thought that I just happened to be in a year where maybe the competition wasn't as tough, or for whatever reason, maybe I won because it looked like a novelty. So yeah, you know, grand strategy was I'm just going to win more shit. And there's a point where no one's going to be able to say anything. And then the big testing moment was the following year where I went to defend my title and I lost. And Craze won, where I was like, shit, I was supposed to win a few of these. And now I just lost a whole year of planning because Craze is just incredible and beat everybody. But Craze and I ended up joining forces in a crew called the Allies. And then the following year, I entered many battles and I ended up winning multiple things that year and the year after. And I ended up getting to that point that I wanted to have, where I was like breaking records of how many battles I won, and you know, had way more support from my peers. But you know, in the meantime, I think I also learned to have thick skin. Like part of being in the spotlight is everyone has something to say. Everybody has an opinion, and a lot of people. It's easier to hate than to embrace. You know, so a lot of people were hating. But I was just focused on improving and getting better. It's funny when I look at those years. Also, I feel like in the months after I won that first DMC battle, that's probably the period that I improved the fastest and the most because I was aware of people doubting me. So um, right after I won that first battle, I got a lot better really fast because I was like, all right, now this is serious and I gotta like prove a point.
What's cool is we had Craze on a few months ago, and he was talking about when he met you, and he was like, "Wow, this
Mm.
is a force to be reckoned with," right? And he's like, he's got to join our crew like right away.
Yeah,
So
when Crazy and I met, we were both like, we did that one battle where he beat me, but still we were both like, I don't want to battle this guy anymore. Both of us were kind of scared of each other, so we joined forces.
and how did that work? How did that dynamic? Would you guys not battle each other? So when there was a
Yeah,
battle,
we literally like split the map,
split them up.
like with the allies, because it was more. You know, there was also Develop, Infamous, Spectacular, J Smoke, and then later on we brought in Clever, and we would decide who's doing what. So Craze just ended up being like the DMC king. He just kept winning. So the rest of us didn't enter DMC anymore. I went and did ITF. I went and did the Vestax Championship, and then Craze and I did DMC teams together. So we would literally decide who's going where, and we would just try to like dominate everything. One of the funniest things that we did, because once we were, you know, in that zone of the allies and we were just like on some domination shit for battles, we started having fun with it also. And so in 99 there was the ITF battle. That's International Turntablist Federation. They ended up changing names later, but that was at the time that was a very credible battle. Like that was the most respected one within the community. And there was what they called the Western Hemisphere Eliminations, which is basically America. And then we knew that whoever won that would get to the World Finals, and the World Finals were going to be in Hawaii. We already knew that. So a bunch of us entered these different categories in the Western Hemisphere elimination. And we were thinking, we're like, oh, so whoever wins this goes to Hawaii for the Worlds. So we went to the battle. We were all wearing Hawaiian shirts. And it was like winter time in New York, so it's not a usual thing to wear. So we're wearing Hawaiian shirts. And any DJ that we ran into, especially people who were in the battle, they'd be like, oh, what's with the shirt? And we would just be like, we're going to Hawaii. As in, like, I'm beating you today and I'm going to Hawaii. So we were just kind of like play mind games with it and have fun with it. And we did go to Hawaii and we all won. So it worked.
So Shortcut says A-Trak changed my work ethic, thinking for practicing on routines.
That's ill. That's ill. Yeah, I get Short and I should have a conversation about that. But shout out to Shortcut. He was always a big inspiration for me, and even especially in the years that followed the period that I'm talking about now, because by that point, after winning a few battles, I started getting really more interested in like the broader sense of DJing and knowing how to rock parties and playing different genres. And within the pickles, Short was always, you know, this amazing party DJ too, who had a really broad knowledge, whether it be hip hop or classics or dance hall. And so even back then, we used to, like back when I lived at my parents' house in Canada, we'd have these long phone conversations and just talk about kind of where we want to go and where I wanted to go with DJing too. He gave me some great advice.
So from 97 to 2000, you guys win five championships, which is crazy, right?
Hmm.
And then you decided to step away. Let's talk about what the five meant, and then once you said, okay, let me pivot a little bit.
It got to a point where it got to a point where like it took so much time, like months, time as in like practically the whole year, to prepare for those battles that it ended up feeling like um, none of us could even do anything else with our DJing. It was like it was consuming everything. And the turntablist scene and the battle scene lost a little bit of steam after a few years too. Like I was lucky to get on the scene at a point in time when turntablism itself was having a huge boom. There was wind in the sails. Everyone was paying attention. There was articles about me in like Interview Magazine, the magazine that Andy Warhol founded. They would write about me and be like, "Hey, there's this kid doing really cool stuff with turntables. You know, Spin, all those kinds of magazines. Like not as in like not only specialized hip hop publications, but just like cultural publications were talking about this phenomenon of turntablism. That died down after a few years, the same way that any trend will have a cycle. So when we all felt like turntablism was losing a little bit of public interest, and you know, when I say we, the allies, my friends and I, we all kind of wanted to explore production and maybe try doing some tours. It felt like all that time and energy that we were putting into planning new battle routines just wasn't worth the effort anymore. Like, and we felt like we proved the point that we wanted to prove. So, so yeah, 2000 was my last year battling, and those the years that followed were interesting and kind of testing in a way because the whole DJ landscape really changed. So a lot of my DJ friends just kind of either became the local resident at a local club or went back to school or just did other stuff because this tight knit community that was kind of a bubble just it lost steam. It fell apart a bit. But I was so young that I still felt like I was just getting started. So so all those years of battling just ended up being my foundation to go and do other stuff later on. So when I got into uh, doing eclectic party sets, mixing up different genres, and I was able to like implement some scratching tricks into that. When I taught myself how to produce and do remixes, um, I my DJing ear was helpful with that, and then I got the Kanye gig, and of course that was based off of my skills. That was him wanting to have literally the best DJ on earth because he just wanted to show off. Like Kanye, his whole thing was like he had John Legend, who he would call the future of R&B, and then he had me, and it would be literally like on the LEDs on the back of the stage it would say the best DJ on earth, A-Trak. And that's the show, for the first year or so that we all toured together. That was the show. It was Kanye, John Legend, and me. And so that was based off of my accolades as a battle DJ. And then later on started Fool's Gold, of course, and everything else. Because everything I've done is based off of those, long hours and years of practicing and like sharpening the swords in my early years.
What's interesting to me though is especially when you do the DMC, right? So you're so young now. You start to
Yeah,
get your later teen years.
yeah,
I think you were 19 when you finished, right? About 19.
yeah. 18, 19. I think my last battles I was still 18.
Okay. So
So
now,
at 19 I stopped battling. Yeah,
there's this weird change, right? The scene is different. You decide to step away, and
yeah,
you talk about wanting to be like a Missy Elliott's DJ. And I love
yeah. I did. Yeah, I
the
did want that.
clips. The clip story I love when you met Pusha T, and you're like, okay, let me show you this routine. You had the little
Yeah,
camcorder. So
yeah.
how did that work? And even like just trying to find something to be somebody's DJ, like
Well, here's the other thing to keep in mind. Like we're talking about like 2001, 2002, three, those years. The DJ scene in North America was also not really organized. I mean, it was big. There was clubs everywhere, but there wasn't like, big management companies. There wasn't routed tours at all. It was just one-offs. So I had a booking agent who booked, a bunch of other turntablists and like drum and bass DJs and a bunch of different shit. He had like a pretty eclectic roster. Um, So I had shows, and even I would go internationally because based off of my reputation with the battles and stuff, I would get booked. I would go to Asia, go to Europe, and even in Europe, I was playing festivals, which was something that barely existed in America at that point. Um, but I was zigzagging. It wasn't much strategy to it. It was like, okay, they want to book me in Columbus on this weekend, and then in San Bernardino next weekend. All right, and then wherever the offers came, that's where I went. Strategy came later, and the scene itself was just kind of going through changes. Like I mentioned, turntablism was like less at the forefront. So I could rock a hip hop set, but I was also starting to get interested in different kinds of sounds and mashups. And then Serato came out, and I was the first DJ to endorse Serato. Through digital DJing, my library of songs got really big really fast. And then I started messing around with even more genres and mashups, and that kind of like led me down the path of messing around with production too. And then MySpace became a thing. And through MySpace, I started connecting with a lot of like-minded DJs. You know, to be honest, a lot of turntablists and a lot of battle DJs aren't very good club DJs or don't really rock club sets that well. And I really like put pressure on myself to get good at that. I never took for granted that because I could scratch better than the next guy that I would be a good DJ in the broad sense. I was like, oh, now I got to learn this whole other thing. So I really worked hard to be a good DJ in the general sense. And I was curious about just a lot of like cross pollination musically. And I was discovering a lot of cool new electronic sounds that I was getting stuff off of blogs in Europe and that kind of stuff. And I was just like mixing genres. And yeah, when MySpace became popular in the DJ community, that was a real catalyst for me too. And I was starting to go to New York more and more, and like everything that led to Fool's Gold being founded, and me doing my early production work, the Kid Sister records, if anybody remembers that, and some of my early remixes, my Boys Noise remix, like that was just, it became an era of experimentation that it was as important, as formative to me as my battle era was. Like this mid 2000s era where I was like learning how to produce on a laptop and mixing up, styles and production techniques, like some stuff from hip hop production, the way I chopped up my drums, but learning how to also use VSTs and synths and do sound design and just get shit to sounds like, these electronic remixes, but not really knowing what I was doing, which probably helped me because I ended up creating sounds that were more unique, and meeting these other DJs online that were doing interesting shit in London, in Italy, but also, in LA, wherever. That was the foundation for Fool's Gold and everything I've done since, really.
So I kind of want to go. So not to go too much on the Kanye thing, because I know where people try to bait you, where they try to
Yeah.
sound like you influenced it, like you influenced everything Kanye did, and you talk about how you both influenced each other.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
so let's talk about first the meeting, because so you're at the record store, right? What was it? The
Yeah, in London there's a shop called Deal Real.
Deal
Doesn't
Real,
exist anymore, but it was great. It was really dope. It was just a small shop, like really small, but they always had cool in stores. And I was in London for a club gig, and the promoter had me do an in store to promote my party that was coming up that weekend. And I ended up being in the same small space as like Damon Dash and Kanye and John Legend. John Legend was barely known. He had like maybe one single out, but he was just known as like the guy who toured with Kanye and who played the piano. So he was trying to promote his records. So just by chance, that same shop gave in stores to me and John Legend. So then Kanye ends up seeing me do a routine, and I had a routine on a Jay-Z record. And well, he liked the fact that I flipped the record that he recognized. I remember we talked about it later on, and he was like, "Man, every time I see some of these scratch DJs, they're just doing some shit I don't understand." But he was like, "You flipped a good Jay-Z record that I know, and then you did some cool shit with it." He was like, "I feel like that's kind of how I make my music and what my crowd would understand." So he wanted a DJ who was good, but a DJ who could also be understood by his crowd. Um, and he was right. Like at that point in time, turntablism was getting too specialized.
Mm.
Um, it was just like a branch that was just way off on its own in its own space. Um, But I was always interested in building bridges and connecting scenes and shit. So that's kind of how Kanye and I bonded, because we both, if you think about those early Kanye records and College Dropout, and back when he was making stuff with um Valley of the Peoples and Slum Village, like that era of Kanye,
Yeah.
he was taking a sort of Native Tongues aesthetic, but he was making Billboard chart topping records out of it. So he was taking this thing that was very pure, the chipmunk samples and all that kind of stuff, but making it digestible without compromising, just making authentic hip hop in a way that is universally acceptable. That's the genius of College Dropout, is right. It's just like this really authentic sound, but that it's not only for the heads, it's for everyone. And that was my ambition with DJing at that point. With at where I was at in my process after years of experimenting in DJing, I stood for the pure shit, but I wanted to show it to the masses. So we really connected with having that same ambition of like, okay, we know how to take pure shit but present it to everyone.
I love that. One of the things that sticks out to me though is I love the fact that you didn't. Man, it's just so it almost goes back to your when you went to the World Finals, right?
Yeah.
The DMC, the World Championships, and now here you are, right? So it wasn't like you just went to the record store. It actually didn't happen. Most Def comes in, they start rapping. Before you know it, it's a frenzy, right? You,
Yeah. I had to track Kanye down at the next day. Yeah. With
yeah.
that, yeah.
So I love
It
that.
took some hustle.
Was it Dame Dash's assistant? So she told you about a like a press conference thing they were doing. You end up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Kanye saw me at the in-store, but then I didn't get to talk to him. So I had taken down the phone number of Dame's assistant. And then like the next day I was like, yo, I gotta, where can I connect with you guys? And she kind of told me where I could find Yay. And then I had to go and sort of hustle and make it happen. But, I just think that there's these moments where that it's worth, just taking a shot. Like sometimes you just get a sense like, okay, I know this is crazy and I got to go to the airport in 3 hours, but I'm just going to show up at this thing because I think this will make a difference. But, I will say this to people watching, there's a fine line between like when it comes to like trying to identify those moments that could be, game changers in your life. I think a lot of people now are looking for a situation where someone else can change their life, and there's there's a lot of like, you got to give me a shot kind of mentality. And I think it's important for people to know that no one is going to do something for you. Like as important as it is to identify these moments where a door could open, you still have to open that door and you still have to deliver and you still have to make it happen. And, sure, sometimes there's certain connections that help catalyze something. But it kind of bums me out when I see people get caught up in the mentality of like, just, someone else could really change everything for me. That no one else will do something for you. You got to do it yourself.
I love that. That's such great advice. And what's interesting about that is you said like you just showed up on a whim. You didn't get to meet him, right? The frenzy happened.
Yeah.
You show up with just a bag. You kind of catch him, and then you start talking, and then you end up vibing.
Yeah.
And of course, I love the fact that you said that you had to deliver because that's so important to the process and
Yeah.
something that you've done over and over. So another story that I love that I feel like is missed is when he was going to sample Stronger, right? So you played it for him.
Yeah.
And sometime later, he's like, "Oh, I'm going to sample it," and you weren't actually for it. You thought it was a classic, and you're like, "I don't know, this is a classic." And then
Yeah, that's right.
how he went and dug through it and kind of reinvented it. Could you kind of go through that?
Yeah, sure. So I while we were on tour, Swizz had done the Busta record, Touch It, that sampled Daft Punk Technologic. And so, I mentioned that was a Daft Punk sample, realized that Kanye didn't know about Daft Punk. So I played him a couple of other Daft Punk records, and he was really drawn to Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, and was talking about sampling it. And a lot of people try to credit me for like making that song happen, and Stronger ended up being kind of a paradigm shifting record. But like you mentioned, I always want to point out that I told him that he shouldn't sample it,
Yeah.
because I was still approaching sampling from more of a 90s mentality where you're not supposed to sample a record that's already a huge hit, or you're not supposed to sample something that came out 5 years ago. Like, you know, I was still in a beat digging mindset, not a sort of let me grab this huge record and sort of jump on it mindset. But Ye had, enough creativity to flip that stronger sample in a way that was, you know, different enough, and added different chords and changed, yeah, just kind of changed the structure of it where it didn't feel like he jacked it. It wasn't, I just didn't want him to do like a sort of Puff Daddy sampling Led Zeppelin Kashmir kind of move. And I love Puff, but there's a few of those, like the Led Zeppelin shit I always thought was whack. Even the Sting sample, the Every Breath You Take, I was kind of like, eh. So I wanted to make sure it wasn't one of those.
That's great. Now,
Yeah.
how do you think he influenced you on your early? Because you said you were starting to like really start to produce. Then you were taking it more serious. How did that come in?
Yeah.
How did he influence that?
Um, I mean, it was just sort of around that time that I was teaching myself how to produce in general. And prior to that, for a while, I was making beats that were sort of scratch based and like layers of samples. So I had like a Pro Tools LE, which was kind of like the first like consumer version of Pro Tools. And I would like, scratch a sample of an instrument and scratch a kick drum and scratch a snare and just do these like really layered beats that sounded probably more like DJ Shadow or RZA or Madlib than, compared to any productions that you guys have heard from me. So that was like my early beats. But meanwhile, my DJing was getting more and more up tempo and energetic and like remix based. And there was kind of this aha moment where I was like, I should make tracks that sound like what I want to play in a set. And that's when I started experimenting with faster stuff and bringing in more of an electronic influence. And remixes were my way to learn how to produce, because when you do a remix, you have a starting point. The artist sends you stems, and there's at least a vocal and maybe a few instrument stems that have something good about them, since there's a song that worked in the first place. So that was like my testing ground to learn how to produce. So my first couple remixes, every one of them was like me trying to figure out a trick, you know? Like I remember the first time I had to figure out what sidechain was. Like most people didn't know what that was, but I'd be like, how do you do that pumping sound? So that was like, I got that in one remix. Then I wanted to do a remix that had like a sort of Italo arpeggiated bass line. Well, how do you do that? Oh, I got this one plugin that has an arpeggiator. Try to figure it out. So I was just like literally just learning building block by building block how to figure out these production tricks before making any original songs.
That's so cool. Now, once you were, I want to get to that part where you had done the Kid Sister song, the Pro Nails.
Yeah, shout out to Chris Fader for naming my early Dipset beats that were scratch beats. That's right. Don't fool with the dips.
That's so funny. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris Fader. So with the Pro Nails, so the Kid Sister Pro Nails song,
yeah,
him jumping on the song, you creating it. You were talking about you were on the tour bus, and he heard it, and he was like, "Oh, let me hear what you got going." Like, how was that relationship? Where were you on your production stage?
Yeah, there was kind of an overlap of time where I hadn't quit the Kanye gig yet, but I was starting to produce and I was starting to mess around with what was going to become Fool's Gold. There was an overlap of about a year. And then I stopped my work with Kanye to focus on production and focus on Fool's Gold. But Pro Nails, I'd made that beat. And I was still like really trying to figure out what DAW, like what software to use. So I remember Pro Nails, the synths were on Reason, and then I rewired it into Ableton, which was like Ableton was like way older back then. So I was using MIDI on Ableton with rewired synths from Reason, and then like a couple of audio tracks too. And that's how I made that beat, and then dumped it into Pro Tools to record her vocals and mix it in Pro Tools. So, anyways, I had that track and recorded her vocal. And then I just went on tour with Kanye, and everything was kind of on hold in my life for a little while. But he did hear me working on Pro Nails, and he liked it. And I just, to me, that sound, the more up-tempo thing, was a different part of my life than what I did with Kanye. That was still kind of hip hop and just, you know, a different sort of cipher. But he loved the Kid Sister record, and he, you know, he was kind of mentioned like, oh, I'm gonna jump on that, but like I never thought it would happen. And then later on, once everyone was back at home off tour, you know, one day he was like, send me that beat, and he did a verse that day, you know. And for anybody that remembers the Can't Tell Me Nothing mixtape that Kanye did with Plain Pat, he said a little intro before Pro Nails. He said, A-Trak didn't ask me to get on this. This wasn't no favor. Da, da, da. This is that hot shit, some like Chicago shit. And he premiered the record on there.
That's dope. That's really dope.
Yeah.
So Fool's Gold. So you tell him you're leaving the tour. That was funny.
Yeah.
You said he kind of knew, right? You asked to speak to him. You leave.
Yeah, that's right. He
And
saw it coming.
And part of that had to do with Fool's Gold, or was it the touring? What made you leave?
Yeah, it was mostly Fool's Gold, and also just kind of realizing that like for as long as I worked with Kanye, I was always gonna be just Kanye's DJ, and like I had ambition to do more than that, and not even just on the future sense, but even prior to that, I was this very decorated world champion DJ, and then I realized that all that stuff could sort of get swept in the rug and just become he's Kanye's guy. So nothing against Kanye, but I, you know, I was proud of what I did by myself before, and that there's more that I wanted to do after too. So I decided to step away from that job. And musically, I was just really excited about, you know, these new records that I was starting to work on with my friends, and new remixes and Fool's Gold, and it was a whole new scene. It was a new sound. Like it was really exciting. So I just wanted to be able to focus on that.
Now I know you talk about that the bigger entities, like the bigger labels, didn't get it per se.
Yeah.
Was it that, and was it also owning your masters and stuff like that? Like, what was more important to you, or a combination?
I mean, the part about owning masters wasn't we always did those deals from the start with Fool's Gold. We always did net profit split 50-50 deals where the artist keeps their masters and keep their publishing. It was also like we didn't have enough money to give people big enough advances to say, hey, now we own this. We just kind of were partners from the start. Like, hey, we know how to press this up. We know how to get great artwork. We know how to get great remixes. We'll get it to the right ears, and then we'll just split money down the middle. That's just how we started the label, and we've always done those kinds of deals. But like you were mentioning, there was a lot of new music going on at that time that the major labels weren't even noticing because they were too overwhelmed by trying to understand downloads and losing business off of that, and you know, going after piracy shit and trying to shut down Napster and LimeWire and Kazaa and all those sites. They were so blindsided by the internet that they were not realizing that music was going through a whole rebirth. So, you know, I was a fan of a lot of indie labels. I grew up idolizing Moax, Stone's Throw, then became friends with the Stone's Throw guys, and then I met the Ed Banger guys in France, and then our friends, you know, Wes and those guys started Mad Decent, and it was just all that you know, DIY mindset was all around us. So we started Fool's Gold.
That's amazing. Now, you guys had some pretty cool in the beginning, specifically too. The Cool Kids, Kid Sister, and then you caught like the early Kid Cudi and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
you talk about Kid Cudi, how you didn't like you were traveling from Australia. What was it like a ridiculous 16, 20-hour
yeah.
flight?
Well, what happened with Cudi was so Plain Pat was Kanye's A&R at Def Jam. So, and even when I left the Kanye gig, everybody, whether it be me and Kanye or everybody from his team, we all stayed friends because we'd spent years together. So Pat discovered Cudi. Cudi was just some guy from Cleveland with like 2,000 MySpace friends or something. Like he was unknown, and he worked at the Bape store, I think, in New York. And so Pat, you know, hit me, and he was like, I found this kid, you know, listen to these 2 or 3 songs. I like it, but he had a job at Def Jam, Pat. But he was like, I don't think this is for for Def Jam yet. Like this is too weird. It's kind of, or not in those words, but this is different, but you'll get it. And yeah, I became really obsessed with Day and Night. And like you mentioned, there was like the deciding moment for me was being on a really long flight and like listening to that one song on repeat on the whole flight. And by the time I got home, I was like, I gotta sign this record. So we signed the single with Cudi, and then that blew up. But that blew up. It took months to blow up. It blew up organically. It took like 6 months to get big, and the Crooker's remix happened really organically. Crooker's heard the original version on the Fool's Gold MySpace page, and they messaged us on MySpace like, "Hey, love that song. Send us stems. We want to do something with it." And we made a free download out of it, and then it got so big that we were like, "Shit, we should probably sell this version too." So then we did a little remix deal with them, and it didn't pay them much at all, um, and yeah, it just kept blowing up.
Wow. Now what's the story with Heads Will Roll?
Heads will roll. So at that point, 2009, my remix thing started around 2006 or 7. Fool's Gold was founded at the start of 2007. So I spent a good amount of 2007 and 8 sharpening my swords, figuring out how to do remixes, learning how to produce that way. And but I was really slow with production. I mean, I'm still pretty slow, but like, I would just take on a remix, spend like a month on it, sometimes more, deliver it probably late, take on another thing, work on that, and in the meantime, work on the label. And there was a lot of hype around that specific Yeah Yeah Yeahs album. I think it's when they signed to Interscope. They were already a really big and cool indie band, and then they went and did like their major label deal, and that album was just great. So I was bumping that album, and I went to see them at Coachella, and I remember when they played that song, Heads Will Roll, their version of it. I remember hitting my manager that day and being like, "See if you can get stems of that song for me. I think I can do a remix of it," which is not the way remixes usually go. Usually the artist or the band will seek out the DJ or the remixer. But I told my manager, like, tell them I'd be down to remix this. It wasn't even like picked as a single for them yet. But we figured it out, and the label was down, so they got me stems, and then I spent like months and months just tinkering with it. And the production is so simple, but that's what took so long. And like, sometimes you just need an original idea. Like I tried another thing at first, but once I figured out those stabs, which was like, I chopped up this Mellotron synth that's in their version, and I figured out how to like make it sound really punchy, and created stabs out of that. And I just kept working on that remix, and like I just would not deliver it. And the label would like ask about it, and I'd be like, still working on it. And then I went on tour, and I would work on it on my tour bus. And then like I went on vacation and worked on it like I just kept messing with it. And like in the fall, like literally 5 or 6 months after I started it, I was finally like, it's ready. But every time I would play it to a DJ friend, like especially my trusted friends, they'd be like, this is dope. So I knew to like continue working on it. I didn't know it would get as big as it was. So then, yeah, months later, I handed into the label, and they're like, this thing? They're like, that single was months ago. What are you doing? And I was like, yeah, but it's like, I just tested it out at a show, and it sounds really big. And they're like, yeah, but we put out a Tommy Sunshine remix of this song already. Like, we're doing the next single now. And then I went to Australia for one of these festival tours. In Australia, there's like the same festival that hits a bunch of cities. And so I was on that tour with like Busy P, Errol Alkan, Tiga, Aeroplane, all these really dope DJs. And I gave them the remix, and we were all playing it on that tour. And it started getting hype. Like it started getting a buzz, and it got back to the label. And they're like, somehow it got back to them that this was a remix that a lot of DJs were starting to play. So they're like, okay, we'll put it out. So they put it out, but even that was sort of like part one of the saga of that remix. A whole ass year later, Project X happened, the movie, right? And that just happened. I happen to know the director of that movie because he's a guy who used to make really cool music videos. Um, so when he was finishing up the movie, he emailed a bunch of his DJ friends, and he was like, "I'm making this big movie, and I want to make sure that we put really cool music on it. Send me whatever you have." And I sent him a couple songs, including he ended up putting Heads Will Roll, and he put this other song of mine, Ray-Ban Vision. He put two songs of mine in that movie, and that movie was so big that to a lot of people, that's when Heads Will Roll really kind of got over the edge. But that was over a year after the remix originally came out, which it almost didn't come out in the first place. So that as surprising as it is that that record still gets played now over 10 years later, it also was like this slow birth that just like there's so many steps to it even like coming out in the first place, that once it was out, it was just never going to go away.
That's an insane. I'm surprised that record they almost passed on it. Meaning, like, imagine it
Yeah,
had never come out. That's
yeah,
insane.
it almost didn't come out, but you know, there's a lot of stories like that.
Duck Sauce.
Yeah.
How did you meet up with Armand, and then when did you finally guys decide working together?
I met Armand when I moved to New York, which was the summer of 2006. And we knew about each other. Of course, I knew who he was, and he was already an influence on my production. But we kind of bonded from just both of us being hip hop guys in house music. Like we both had a hip hop aesthetic, whether it be the way that we cut up drums and samples to even the way we dressed. Like clearly we were hip hop heads who just happened to make electronic music. But we never let go of our hip hop identity. And so we kind of bonded over that. Like once when he heard about me, he knew about my DMC stuff prior, but I remember he told me that he heard this mixtape that I did called Dirty South Dance, which was mashups of like electro tracks and rap vocals. And he was like, he kind of like, he could tell that I had the same mentality as him at at this new stage of my career where I was getting interested in production and things like that. But we didn't make music together until like 3 years later. We just became like fast friends, and we would just hang out. I had just moved to New York. He lived there. The scene was really interesting. There's like I mentioned earlier, that sort of like cross pollination of really cool new electronic music going on, and he loved that shit. So I would just tell him when there was a cool party going on, and he would just roll with me. And I would show up with Armand Van Helden, which was cool for me too. And we would just kick it, and we'd hang out at his apartment all the time and just goof around. And like way later on, it was like, "Hey, do you want to make a song?" But that took like 2 or 3 years before we got to that point.
So interesting.
But I think that's why Duck Sauce really clicked, because by the time we started collaborating, we really knew each other's quirks and shit. I know what he thinks is funny. He knows what I think is funny. We know what our references are. And the sound of Duck Sauce was really a reaction to what was really popular at the time, which was like the first Duck Sauce records were in like 2009. Anyway, was 2009. That was when electro was at its most distorted, when everyone was trying to out distort each other, when it was like, it started from like the French guys and Crookers, and then Billy Beetroots were even more distorted, and there's other artists, and everyone was like, I'm gonna make my shit more slammed and louder. Huge fucking wall of sound. And so when we decided to do our thing, it was meant to be a palate cleanser. It was like fucking classic samples, disco, good feeling, shit that just warms your heart, good time music. It was intentionally a total left turn from what was going on at the time.
That's amazing. Now, when you guys, it's so funny because you talked about when in the early days you guys had about 4 singles, and when you guys played Barbra Streisand for your friends, you guys were like, okay, this is the silly one, and you were talking about laughing for about 15 minutes when you guys would do the drop, etc. So explain
That's
that right.
I mean, Barbra Streisand was just it's a loop, man. We just loop Boney M. Like it's nothing crazy. But yeah, this was like, so we had put out Anyway the previous year, and then we kind of just let that do its thing. And then we started some new demos, and there was like, yeah, 4 songs that we're trying to finish up. And Barbara was one of them, but we weren't, there definitely wasn't a sense that that was going to be the one. And at first it was just the loop and the drums, and it was kind of missing something. And we just kind of went down a funny rabbit hole of like, it's missing something. It's missing a word. Let's have a word that comes in every like 8 bars. Well, what should it say? Well, let's say something that doesn't make sense. Let's say someone's name. Let's say someone's name that has nothing to do with us. And then we just start throwing names at the wall. And then that's how we end up with Barbara Streisand. And then Armand recorded it, and he put a little effect on his voice. And it sounded so good that, yeah, we literally could not stop laughing. Like we would just play it back, and then we'd have to stop it because we're cracking up, and we're like, did we really just do this? And then play it again, and then stop it, just be like, we're so stupid. And next thing you know, it was like topping, like a chart topping record. But we didn't know, man. That song has no song structure. You know what I mean? Like we were going up against like, when that record blew up, it was CeeLo, Fuck You was kind of our competition, and Swedish House Mafia won, and I think a Bruno Mars record. So all these records that are like written by real songwriters and that are like really professionally produced, and we literally just put out a loop, like a silly loop, but it's just earworm. It's just like, there's, at the end of the day, it taught me a real lesson that like simplicity wins, and like when something's catchy, all rules go out the window. Who cares what it's supposed to do? Like if it's catchy enough, that will win people's hearts.
It was number one in 12 countries, which is amazing. Like that's the funniest thing in what it was competing to. Shout out to White Gold. Thank you so much for the raid. We appreciate you, family. Canada in the building. Shout out to White
Nice.
Gold. Okay, so a couple more questions. I know, and then I know you got to run. So
Yeah, I gotta run soon.
let's see 1 second. So I love the duck sauce story. That's amazing. Now let's go to some of the newer stuff. Let's go to the Goldie
Sure.
Awards. Now
Yeah, yeah.
shout out to Lazy Boy and is it Surata? Some of the
Saruda.
Saruta
Saruda, yeah, he
was
won.
the battle
Yep.
beat battle champion, and shout out. We've had Lazy Boy on a couple of times. Shout out to the DJ
Awesome.
battle champion. So this year was a little interesting. Let's talk about what it is, what it was, and then obviously you guys had to go virtual this year. So
Yeah.
how?
So Goldie Awards is a DJ battle and beat battle that I started in 2017. Coming from the battle scene, as it's something that I've always been passionate about, and I wanted to sort of reinvent the format, and just help usher technical DJing and creative beat making into the current times where where DJing and production is hugely popular, um, but where new technology is part of stuff, and where there's younger audience that are following DJs and producers. So my goal with Goldie was connect those dots between battle DJing and beat making that tends to be kind of a closed off scene, connecting that with like the newer audiences or just a broader audience, and allowing any kind of equipment and just letting people be creative with newer sounds. So it started off as an event in New York where we would take in submissions from around the world and narrow down 8 DJs and 8 producers, fly them out to New York, have them battle, and also have like the best judging panel that we could get, like just really get like set the standard at a level that I felt the scene deserved. And we did those events in New York for 3 years, and then COVID happened, of course. And then earlier this year, we decided to try it online, to make it virtual, over Twitch with videos of routines, and it worked out great. We actually got the biggest audience that we've ever had for that event compared to the in-person events, and just a lot of excitement in the scene and a ton of creativity, and people like Lazy Boy also sort of reinventing the format, seizing the opportunity, that realizing that the fact that these are pre-filmed videos, to get even more creative um, with the video format itself. Because what tends to happen with battles is every couple of years, people sort of settle into a style, and then you start seeing the same thing over and over again. So every few years, you need some sort of refresh button, you know. So with Goldies, that's been really important to me, is to make sure that we're encouraging the DJs that are reinventing the format as much as possible.
That's so cool. Now, what stood out to you now? And now, shout out to Lazy Boy.
Yeah.
What stood out to you that was like it just screamed that he's the winner? Like, what was it specifically? Was there
I
anything?
mean, yeah. By the way, I wasn't the only judge. It was a few of us judging, but for me, there was a couple of incredible DJs in that battle. But one thing that Craze and I talk about a lot is like the sort of the wow factor of a winning routine. At the end of the day, the winner needs to be the person that does something that everyone's going to talk about afterwards and be like, yo, but when that person did that, like the same way people will be like, yo, when Craze did the Art of Noise juggle at the US finals in 98, or you could be like, when 8 Ball did, pitch uh melodies with the pitch controller, that kind of shit. Like when Noise did wordplay, like you can remember when a certain DJ comes and does a trick that you don't even have to sing it out. You could just like say one or two keywords and people will remember how it shocked the world. And I think the way that Lazy Boy approached his video creation, and even just the level of personality that he injected into it, you know, that kind of just took it over the edge. That wow factor is important because at a lot of battles, there's many DJs that are excellent, that are really, really excellent. But there's always someone that like captures people's hearts. That's just like, yo, I need to show this to all my friends. That's the winner.
That's amazing. That's amazing. How did the beat battle go? How was that set
It
up?
was awesome too. The beat battle is almost tougher to judge because like everyone is good in the beat battle, and there's even more. We end up getting different genres and styles in there. So Tsuruta kind of took it over the edge just because his sound design is really next level. But that was a really tight one too. And so now we're going to put out a Tsuruta record on Fool's Gold with a bunch of the beats that he used in the Goldies. So that's what's fun too, is like connecting dots between these different projects.
That's amazing. That's really cool. I also like how you talk about really just elevating the DJ game because you felt like the competition thing, there was a disconnect. And now it's kind of, you're putting the DJ in a different light. Could you
Yeah.
elaborate on that?
I mean, there's a lot of amazing technical DJs that don't get to be exposed outside of their circle or outside of their bedroom slash like a couple of events that they play at, and I'll see some of those DJ skills, and I'm like, man, I need the world to see this,
Yeah.
And then through the work that I do, whether it be with Fool's Gold or my music or whatever else, I've been able to build a certain trust with different audiences, so that I could be like, yo, hey, everyone who knows me for Duck Sauce or Heads Will Roll or whatever else, or who's seen me play at a festival, check this out, trust me. And then I'll show them the best turntablists in the world. And like that's like at this point, I feel like that's my duty.
That's great. That's great. All right, people. So we're gonna just hit you with a couple questions that we can let you go. What I want to do is make sure you guys jump into our Discord, tweakedmusictips.com/Discord, and add all your questions there. One of the good ones that I caught here was Bobby Promo asked, "Did Barbara Streisand's camp contact you after the record was released?"
We tried to contact her. We really wanted to meet her, and she was like impossible to reach. But yeah, a few years later, it literally took like 2 or 3 years, and then a couple of people told me that she liked the song, and there was like a Barbra Streisand concert where they were playing our song like before she got on stage. So it got to her eventually.
That's awesome. Someone asked if there's a schedule for next year's Goldie Awards, and do you think it's going to be virtual or in person?
We don't have the schedule yet. We're still even figuring out the rest of this year. I think it'll probably be both though. We love the online, the virtual format. We also love the in-person format. So I think both will exist.
Okay. Someone asked, uh, how does it feel to be bigger than the Heads Will Roll record? Meaning, like, some people are one-hit wonders, but you keep reinventing yourself and having bigger and bigger records.
I appreciate that. I'm glad that I still get to do, what I do. Because yeah, it's tough sometimes to when you have a record that gets really big. Sometimes that just kind of haunts you. I'm lucky that I still like that song. Some people have a big record that they don't even want to play. Like I'm just glad I like it.
Shout out to Cleveland Terry. We see you in the building, fam. Thank you so much. That was Miller Lite DJ, by the way. I didn't catch who it was, but now I got it. All right, so let's go through some of these other ones here. 1 second. All right. Can you ask where we can see him replay of the DJ battle for the Goldie Awards? That's Diamond.
We yeah. Most of the routines are on my YouTube channel. There's a few of them that are still being uploaded this week, actually. But throughout this week, we're finishing up putting all the routines and all the sets on my YouTube channel.
Okay, and what's the YouTube? Is it the Fool's Gold?
It's A-Trak.
Oh, A-Trak. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Mods, if we could find that link and put it in the chat, please. DJ Pudgy asks, when you won the DMC at age 15, did you know that you wanted to be a producer and label owner?
Probably not. I just like to scratch at that age. I was starting to. My brother and I had an independent label around that same time in Montreal on the hip hop side. So label maybe, producer maybe, but like I think the question is more: did I know that I would ever play like a techno record or like that? Where the musical horizons went over the years, that I never would have guessed that I'd be into so many different styles.
That's good. Now you're probably gonna have to. This is gonna be a two-part question. Where did you choose the name Fool's Gold? I don't think people know what Fool's Gold is. So if you want to explain to them.
Fool's gold is an actual mineral. It's called pyrite. It's a mineral. It's a thing that looks like gold but isn't gold. But it's a we don't like it's a disputed story. No one can remember who came up with the name. But a couple of friends and I started that label in 2007. Myself, Nick Catchdubs, Dust La Rock. And yeah, with that, we all had like brainstorms, like long ass lists of names, and that's the one that stuck. But it's one of those names that just sounded cool. It's like not even really about what it means, but just sounded cool.
And I don't know if you know, but there was a thing that Elvis named a sandwich called Fool's Gold. Did you ever hear that story?
I didn't even know that.
So it's like, yeah,
I didn't know that, but I know the Stone Roses song. There's a famous Stone Roses song that's called Fool's Gold.
Okay, let's see what else we got. The ask is, have you ever run into Barbara Stan? Yeah, okay, did you know if she liked the song? We already asked that one. That's a different variation of that. Let's see who else. Did you ever write out your scratch routines? I guess practice?
Yeah, and I used to have a notation system for scratching. Not the full routines, but I came up with a notation system for scratching. And then I did some like lectures about that in my scratchiest of my scratch years. So there's some information on that online. If you look up ScratchCon on YouTube, ScratchCon 2000s, there's an extremely nerdy video of me explaining how I notate scratches at age like 19 or something.
Okay, that's good. Philip Tan asked, the Goldie Awards seem to feature young DJs consistently than other battles, like Rainer and DJ Michelle.
Yeah.
Is this part of the mission? Are you actively going out looking for younger contenders or on social media?
In part, yeah. For sure. Yeah, DJ Rena, Brandon Duke, Michelle was 8 this year. DJ K Swiss was like 13 when he did Goldies a few years ago. So it's, we don't pick them because they're young, but we like to make sure there's 1 or 2 very young contestants each year, just because we're just looking for the future.
This is a good one, and I hear all the time from DJs complain, so I would love your perspective on it. DJ Shaggy asks, love playing your tracks, but they get blocked every time. Any chance you can fix that?
Shit, that's the whole thing about blocking is like, it's not the artist. It's not even Fool's Gold. It's not even label. Sometimes it's like through the distributor. That's weird though, because it tends to be more major label distributors that block, and we're not with a major distributor. So I'm not even sure. That's the whole streaming thing is just like the record industry is not understanding how to make it work. I hope they figure it out.
Got it. Okay, so DJ Scotty B asks, what have you learned about the music biz from your brother? And what has your brother learned about the music biz from you?
I mean, we still do everything together. Like I see my brother practically every day. He's the person I consult the more for my music. I'm the person he consults the most for Chromeo. You know, we're partners in each other's companies and labels. Like we still do everything together. So I wouldn't know where to start, but it's just great to have someone that I can trust, you know, wholeheartedly, and the other way around too. We both trust each other, and we like every day we're helping each other with stuff.
Now, would there ever be I don't know if this has already happened, but a Dave One on a A-Trak record or Chromeo A-Trak collab?
Well, no, but we started a project together last year, the Brothers Maklovich.
Mm.
So the Brothers Maklovich is just Dave and I. We have 2 records that came out in the last couple months. So definitely look that up.
Oh.
Yeah, there's 2 singles that are out.
What style is that?
It's kind of like soulful house, acid jazz house, Masters at Work influenced. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that's awesome. Shout out to DJ Daily 84. I already called it out before. Somebody already said it. Shout out to you. All right. I'm going to be crucified if I don't ask this. So what they
okay.
like,
I'm going to have to run. I'm going to have to go after that one.
No, you're just going to leave. Guys, if you could just go through the chat real quick and just shout out a couple of DJs in the chat, that's all. And then I'll be letting you go.
You want me to give shout outs to DJs?
Yeah, you give shout outs, right? As they come down. Let's see.
Okay, cool. Shout out Miss Ninja, Sir Lancelot, Cleveland Terry, what's up? Bobby Promo, shout out Just Todd. Everfresh, shout out Darth Vader, shout out Boom Bap Kid, Silent John, DJ Spawn, DJ Caramel, DZ Smoking That Thing, DJ Chris Craze, what up? Marcy Baby, Andres Antonio. What else we got? Ida loves you. Shout out to everybody tuning in. I appreciate it.
I don't know if you see that chat moving right now, but if you have it held, it's not moving, but this thing is flying. So
yeah, I'm just trying to keep track of it.
So where can we find you, sir?
Yeah, I'm on the old socials. Just A-Trak on Instagram and Twitter and wherever else.
Okay, so we have everything in the chat. We'll make sure that our mods put it in there. Also, cool. You are streaming on Fool's Gold on Twitch, correct? The Fool's Gold Rex?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as far as on Twitch, I use the Fool's Gold channel, Fool's Gold Rex. That's right.
And how often do you guys stream, or is it periodic?
Well,
do you have kind of a schedule?
On Fool's Gold, there's streams every week, sometimes even multiple times a week. We have a lot of guest DJs. I myself, depends. Maybe it depends what I'm working on. Every couple of weeks.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, but definitely go and follow, subscribe Fool's Gold, because we have guests all the time.
A-Trak, everybody. A-Trak, I want to thank you so much for spending all this time with us. We really appreciate you, my brother. Thank you so much. Anything you ever need to plug, please let us know.
All good. Thank you.
Take care, my brother. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody. Peace.
So Wednesday, we'll see you 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. UK. That's with Kevin Crown, Big John, talking about the big communities. And then on Friday, we're going to do our DJ streamers that are now doing, not only did they just turn partner, but they're actually transitioning this into in real life gigs, which I think is super important. And since a lot of places are opening, some places are not, but some places are, I think it's super important. So we'll see you guys on Wednesday, tomorrow.